You can stay ahead of the storm with Dr. Neil Frank on 11 News.
Watch the thunderstorm just explode this afternoon.
The most experienced, over 43 years as a meteorologist.
Well, first, let me introduce myself. I'm Neil Frank, and I am a meteorologist. And I would like to take some time and discuss a very controversial subject that would be global warming, and as it is morphed into a more recent term, that would be climate change. Now, first of all, let me give you my credentials. I have a PhD in meteorology from Florida State University. Once I left and graduated from Florida State, I joined the National Hurricane Center, where I was a hurricane forecaster for some 25 years. I had the privilege of being the director in 1974 to 1987. Then I retired from the federal government, and I became the chief meteorologist for the CBS affiliate in Houston, KHOU on Channel 11, where I retired in 2008. And in the last 15 years since my retirement, I have devoted my attention to global warming or climate change. Have you ever wondered how much it would cost to turn the Earth into green energy? I've seen one estimate of $92 trillion. It's very expensive. It's prohibitively expensive, and I don't think that will ever occur. But if we even do a little bit, it's still going to be expensive. And you know, the real tragedy is that carbon dioxide is not a major factor in the Earth's temperature. So why are we demonizing fossil fuels? Fossil fuels are cheap and very reliable energy. As a matter of fact, this nation is great because of fossil fuels and cheap energy. There is no climate crisis. And yet there are a multitude of people that are pushing climate crisis. They've zeroed in on 5 meteorological events, and they tell us that in each of those events, they are increasing in intensity and increasing in frequency. Now, what do the facts show? Let's take a look and start out with drought. A drought requires a very extended period of hot, dry weather. Now, one way you can measure that is look at the percent of the weather stations in the entire United States that had maximum temperatures of over 95 degrees in the months of June and July. This is the curve that shows that, starting in 1926. Now, that big peak you see on the left side of your screen, that is the Dust Bowl years in the 30s. And you can see that since that time, that droughts have decreased in intensity and decreased in frequency. What we've seen today in terms of drought doesn't compare with what happened in the Dust Bowl. I was a preteen in northwest Kansas during the Dust Bowl, and I can still remember the drifts of dirt, and there was very little paint on the buildings. And when we went to school, we always had to take our goggles because we didn't know when there would be a dust storm blow in, and we had to protect our eyes. So you've been lied to. The droughts have not increased. Well, perhaps it is forest fires. The government has been keeping track of the acreage burned by forest fires since 1926. That would be on the left-hand side of your graph. And yes, before World War II and even in World War II, there was significant destruction caused by wildfires. Then in 1950, a big change took place, and foresters tell us that they initiated some very effective programs like controlled burning. And that worked very well until the 80s. And then the environmentalists came in and said, you are endangering the wildlife. Therefore, you've got to stop all this controlled burning. And as a result, there has been a decrease in wildfire damage over the last couple of decades, but it was caused by environmentalists themselves. And we've been told by some people that by the year 2100, that New York City, Miami Beach, and maybe even Galveston Island will be underwater. Now, this curve shows the rate of increase of sea level since 1855. And you can see that it's been very steady. And the steady rate is 8 inches per century. Let me pause for now. 8 inches per century. And 8 inches is not going to flood New York City, nor will it flood Galveston Island. Well, maybe it's heat. The BBC put out a report this year, that says that July of 2023 was the hottest month ever measured on Earth and may be the warmest month in the last 125,000 years. Now, this graph shows the temperature of the Earth for the last 10,000 years. And yes, the temperature has been increasing for the last 175 years. As you can see, way on the right of your graph there. But I'm delighted that it has increased, and you should be also, as we emerge from what was called the Little Ice Age. And during the Little Ice Age, hundreds of thousands of people, particularly in Europe, they died of starvation because of crop failures. Now, if you look at that graph very carefully, you'll see that every 1,000 years, there's a peak in the temperature. The temperature 1,000 years ago was warmer than it is today when they farmed in Greenland for 400 years. The temperature 2,000 years ago was warmer than today, and that was the time of the Roman peak. 3,000 years ago, it was warmer than today, and that was the time that Egypt thrived. Now, it's kind of interesting. Between those peaks, there was a mini ice age, and both Europe and Rome failed during those periods. Societies like warm weather, and they struggle in cold weather. Now, if you look across the left, the rest of the graph, you'll see that the peaks at 4, 5, and 6 are not quite so dramatic, but look at 7 and 8. The temperature today is colder by 2 to 3 degrees than it was 8,000 years ago. What about the BBC report that this was the warmest year in the last 125,000 years? Well, it isn't even the warmest temperature in the last 10,000 years. So if it isn't heat, maybe it's storms, and we're being told that storms are increasing in frequency and intensity. Let's start out with tornadoes. A violent tornado is defined as one that has 160 mile-an-hour winds. You can see the number of violent storms since 1950. They've been recorded by the Weather Service. And there has been a significant decrease in that type of storm. As a matter of fact, in 2018, there wasn't even one of those storms. And over the last 5 years, they've averaged between 2 and 3. So no, tornadoes have not increased. Well, it's got to be the hurricane. Hurricane-type storms occur throughout the world. In the Pacific, they're called typhoons, and in the area of India and Australia, they're called cyclones. So the number of hurricane-type storms worldwide since 1980 is shown in this graph, and there is no trend. If anything, there has been a decrease. If you look over on the right, at 2021, there were only 37 storms. The average is 47. In 2022, there were 39, and in 2023, there were 42. So there has been a downward trend, not an upward trend, in the number of hurricanes. So then all 5 of these meteorological parameters that the warmists tell us, or the alarmists tell us, that they are increasing intensity, they're lying to you. They haven't. As a matter of fact, since 1970, there have been 79 dramatic climatic change forecasts. For example, Grower said that in 2015 there would be no ice in the Arctic. Well, we've been now able to prove the validity of 48 of those, and they were all false. So why should we believe the 31 events that yet are to be verified? So if the data does not support climate change, what is the driving force? Well, if we'd have paid attention to the first international meeting on global warming that occurred in Rio de Janeiro in 1992, we would know. Morris Strong was a multimillionaire out of Canada. He was the chairman of that first meeting. And he said, isn't the only hope for the planet that the industrialized civilizations collapse? It isn't our responsibility to bring that about. He said nothing about carbon dioxide. And when I first read that statement, it made no sense to me at all. But a number of years later, another United Nations official clarified what he meant by that statement. We redistribute the world's wealth by climate policy. One has to free oneself from the illusion that the international climate policy is an environmental policy. That's the secret. The whole global warming, the whole climate change has two purposes. International redistribution of wealth, which will lead to a one world government. And in terms of the United States, that means to destroy our economy through green energy so that the neo-Marxist philosophy that has been initiated in this country can lead us to a one-world government or a communist Marxist type of society.